Hello, lovelies. It's another comments video time. So, there was yet another kerfuffle on Reddit. Delayed nonsense about Candela Obscura. My name came up because I did a review. And, of course, in certain sectors of the hobby, I'm persona non grata. So, you know, that went about as well as could be expected. It's probably pointless trying to defend me to these people, and you just run the risk of having your accounts banned and so on, so it's probably not worth the bother, particularly, at least not stridently, not directly. There was also some interesting comments there that I don't seem to like anything, which isn't true. I'm just English and depressive, so that may reflect on things. But when I review stuff, basically anything that gets over a 3 is good. It's just I also cover the bad things about anything that I review. I'm not sure why that's so difficult for people to comprehend or understand. And I did a top 10 video recently, which apparently means that my tastes are calcified in the 90s, despite that list containing games that went back to the 70s and the 80s, and ones that have continued to be published up until today in newer editions and so on. I've also seen the comment in various places that I just hate narrative games. Now, that's not true. I own plenty of narrative games. I've written narrative games. I don't like Powered by the Apocalypse and its derivatives. Even so, I haven't said that it's not a game. I've said it isn't a role-playing game, because the game takes place at the meta storytelling level. There's a card game called Once Upon a Time, which operates at the same sort of level, but neither of these things are role-playing games. It's not a hewing to tradition. It's not that I'm wedded to the OSR or whatever else. There are plenty of more narrative-focused games that I like. So I don't really know what people are talking about. It's always weird when something like this blows up, because you run into the demons that people have constructed that have nothing to do with you. Or quickly, again, I review things based on style and substance. Style is a more subjective metric. It's the art there. Is it good? Is the layout both readable and aesthetic? Is the text presented in a good and inspiring way? Those sorts of things. It's a lot more subjective. Substance is based more on the rules and the content. Does it have all the information that you need? Does it have all the rules that you are likely to need? Does it feel like value for money? Slightly more objective, but still somewhat subjective. I give each one a score out of 5. That gives us a final score out of 10, which I then halve to give us a score out of 5, sometimes tweaking it up or down 1 point for the overall sort of impression that it gives. So the average is 5 out of 10, not 7 out of 10, as you'll see in a lot of reviews, or around 3 out of 5. So anything above that is good, anything below that is bad. And then, of course, I try and contextualize things and explain why I've come to the scores that I have, and so on. But, if it's above 3, then generally speaking, I at least kind of liked it, right? So, I don't know. These people are exhausting, man. And, I did mention in a previous video that I am working on a semi-retro clone, a spiritual retro clone, like they call things Metroidvanias, I suppose, of Bushido. So yeah, the rules are just about done. So you can look forward to something to do with that relatively soon. All right, comments on the videos. I did a flip through of Dicing with Dragons, an artifact from 1982, written by Ian Livingstone, who we all know, of course, who looked very different back then. Judd Goswick says the James Bond 007 system, which was mentioned in that book, is retrocloned in the game Classified for those who loved it. Great video. It's a cool book for its day. It's very much like a time capsule. Yeah, I wonder if a gaming luminary would write something like that these days. Everyone's so bonded to particular companies and shilling their games that this kind of sort of generic, general guide and information book isn't something that might be used anymore. Good information that Classified is out there for people who want it. I never played the James Bond 007 system. I had Top Secret instead, which was also pretty good. So check out Classified if you have fond memories of the 007 game system, or my own Agents of Swing if you prefer a more narrative game that's plugged into the spy-fi of the 60s and 70s. Ajax Plunkett says, Grim, do you feel there's value in looking at older, classic, or even just nuanced old RPG books from the past for history's sake? Or just to compare and contrast these relics with the modern equivalent? I say yes, but will you continue to do these retro reviews / classic overviews in the future? I hope so. I will. After all, I can't afford to just keep buying a whole bunch of new stuff to go over. So new reviews might somewhat necessarily fade away to be replaced by more Know Your Role videos, because they feed the algorithm, and I think it's interesting to look back on these older games and talk about them and recontextualize them in the new gaming world. Also, I am kind of a mind to update and retroclone a lot of older games that are no longer available, to in some way preserve them in an accessible form. There's also current cloning as well, of course, that you can do for games that should be more opened up to people than they are, perhaps, and I've done a bit of that as well. It's maybe slightly naughty. I could see why people might be upset at me for doing it, but there are games that have had long hiatuses that it would have been easier to keep supporting if there were a clone around that people could write for. So that's kind of my motivation there, creating options and preservation. I take my archivist role more and more seriously as time goes on. Gregory Campagna says, thanks, great video. By the way, all of the Space Gamer issues are available free online. They're a goldmine of insight and discussion about what were and weren't cutting-edge RPG designs in the 70s and 80s heyday. So I imagine you can find that if you go Googling for it. Useful to have an archive. A lot of archives get disappeared, unfortunately, over time. Even the Internet Archive can have issues with them. So if you can afford the space, it's worth downloading a lot of these things to ensure that it's still knocking about in the future. John Schur says, the target audience may have been teachers, professors, parents, etc. Basically third-party non-participants. So thinking back to 82, 83, yeah, could have been sort of Satanic Panic era, providing a sort of dry explanation of what these things actually are. Not that it was that dry. And so something that parents could buy without buying into a whole bunch of game books or whatever, to make sure, you know, little John and little Sarah or whoever weren't summoning demons every weekend. So yeah, that's a good thought. But it does feel more like hey, I don't know what these things are. I would like to get into them a bit, maybe, or find out what they're about. And, pre-internet, books like this are probably a good way to go about it. I did a top 10 list in a kind of self-deprecating, slightly humorous way because, listicles are crappy. So, but I did it, and it did particularly well. Not the best video I've ever produced, but it's done pretty well. A generous proportion of my audience and beyond seem to like or be attracted to the top 10 videos, so maybe I should do more of them. It's just that, it feeds the algorithm, but it feels cheap somehow. 03-K64 says, Heavy Gear and the Silhouette system are amazing, and I love them both. Heavy Gear 4th edition is based more on the Blitz miniature rules and is much less rules dense. The rules still allow you to take characters from the RPG and play them on the tabletop, but the rules out of a gear are a bit more narrative. I still really enjoy it, but I'm a Heavy Gear fanboy. It's a good list, can't really argue with it. I also love Cyberpunk 2020. Only thing I'd add is Pendragon. Lots of people say Pendragon. I have copies, but I never got to play it. I like the idea of it. Maybe we'll see at some point if I can get it played. What I actually think about it. Yeah, I backed the new Heavy Gear edition. I've got the PDF. I flipped through it, but I haven't sat down and read it. I'm waiting on the hard copy. I definitely prefer the older edition on the face of it, but once I've had a more in-depth look, perhaps I'll have a more nuanced idea. And there are other games too. Tribe 8's good. Gear Krieg is good. Jovian Chronicles is good. That other one that was over the top space opera, whose name I can never remember, was pretty good too. I don't know. Yeah, hopefully this is a comeback. We shall see, I guess. World Bigfoot Central said, Feng Shui is pronounced Feng Shui. Okay, lots of people said this. Yes, I know, but we always referred to it as Feng Shui, so we knew we were talking about the game, and in a kind of quasi-humorous sort of way, like you might say chop socky for Kung Fu or whatever. So we got in the habit of saying Feng Shui, even knowing that it was completely wrong. It's also that art house game called Nobili, which we ended up calling Noblins because one guy misread the spine text once, and that kind of stuck with us. You can also find Noblins in the D20 version of Matcha Women with Guns that I wrote. So they lived on, all because of a misreading. Dracopol says, the pundit said something to the effect that Vampire the Masquerade forced GMs into a living world where the history of the relations between the vampire clans followed the plan of their storyteller supplements, because they were frustrated writers and wanted a captive audience for their visions of the world. So no matter what stories you wanted to tell as a GM in your own game, you had to follow the history of the great failed writers of the RPG or be left behind in the lore. The pundit has a tendency, at least in his videos, to appeal to conspiratorial thinking and to suggest that people are doing things deliberately, when I tend to think it's more like flocking behaviour and the zeitgeist of the time. I mean, within your local games, things could be different unless you were stuck in the LARP society when there was a lot of pressure to conform to canon. But lots of people were in it for the meta plot, and it sold a lot of books. It was an extra reason why you, as a player or a storyteller, might buy additional books that you might otherwise not buy because they advanced the lore and the timeline and so on. So as a sales tactic, it certainly worked. I don't think it works really anymore, particularly. Privateer Press do it to an extent, but only in very broad sweeping terms for the most part. And the claiming in Privateer Press, I'm not a fan. So, yeah, I don't know if it would work again. Probably not. Beetlejuice says, well, what a nostalgia trip. I totally agree with Mage being a perfect magic system, and I would dare to say it's a better game than Vampire, even if it's not as popular. And Call of Cthulhu, yes, one of my favourites, but because of the setting. BRP is awful, swingy, rigid. Call of Cthulhu deserved a system like Storyteller or better. BRP is such a bad system. Call of Cthulhu is now in the 7th version, and nobody plays that version. We play it. Yes, BRP uses percentages, but that's the only good thing about it, and you're better using Gumshoe or Cthulhu Dark or even Modiphius 2D20. And I said that with love, because Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green are in my top 10 as well. I have to check the other games you mentioned. Thanks for mentioning them. So the current iteration of Call of Cthulhu has degrees of success, depending how well you roll. So it has taken on board some more narrative and descriptive elements. But for me, the percentile, simulationist, quasi-realistic nature of BRP juxtaposes perfectly with the Eldritch horrors and so on in Call of Cthulhu as a setting, and reflects the more scientific but horrified sort of existential angst sort of attitude that Lovecraft had to a large extent. So to me it works, and I generally like BRP for anything more gritty that I might want to do. I did a flip through and a review of 2004's Ex Machina from Guardians of Order, a defunct company of the era that used to pump out a lot of stuff. Makiura says, I always enjoyed the Guardians of Order, Tenchi Mio and El Hazard, the Magnificent World books as reference/essay collections. Yeah, Goo were kind of like GURPS for weebs in a lot of ways. You know, GURPS supplements, even if you don't play GURPS or don't like GURPS, you know, which is me, they still produced great supplements on just about any subject or IP in the past. It's a shame that's fallen by the wayside somewhat, because they were just useful source books for anybody and everybody. I'm guessing the cost of licensing has gone up, but you know, I have copies of their Lensman book, the Prisoner source book, a few others around somewhere. And Guardians of Order did the same sort of thing for anime, which was great, especially at the time. Judd Goswick says, the art in the urban fantasy sibling of this book, Dreaming Cities, was awesome. Some of the setting material in Ex Machina had cool elements, but none grabbed me in total. I was unaware of Dreaming Cities. I will have to see if I can find a copy or a PDF or something somewhere. Rod Batten says, a lot of colour artwork used in modern games looks muddy, and the page tinting/watermarking often makes the pages less readable. The black and white line art seems to pop better, and is usually accompanied by simple black and white text layout that was easier to follow, even in the shitty lighting of the typical gaming table. Yes, and I agree. I think you're channeling me when you talk about the artwork looking muddy. That's a complaint that I have a great deal of the time. It's the lack of contrast and vibrancy. I don't know why people are afraid of decent, readable, visible artwork on the page. It just seems a little bit timid. I don't know why. Are they worried about it being divisive? Is this just the style of the time? I don't know, but it's upsetting. On my review of Werewolf the Apocalypse, Maniac Gear says, glad I bailed on this shit. I got excited when I found out the game I was into 20 years ago was trying to resurge, only to get into the community and find out that it's entirely filled with the worst, most sensitive crybabies I've ever seen. Yeah, what happened, man? Because, Storyteller used to aspire to being art. It used to try and tackle adult topics, and sometimes that kind of lapsed into edginess or whatever, but that was a small price to pay for games that treated you like an adult. And now that seems to be one locus of this community of weaklings, and performative, politically correct, whatever you want to call them. I'm wary because so much of the terminology has been co-opted by the alt-right, as people love to say. But yeah, it was the left, it was BreadTube that coined the term woke scolds, which seems an appropriate term to me. Everyone's so scared of each other, they out anyone who's out of lockstep. It's worrying. On my slightly older Burning Wheel review, JP Loriot joins the legion of whiny Burning Wheel fans when he says, "Not surprised you're puzzled about the game's success, reputation, whatever, if you do a 20-plus minute review and barely mention beliefs, instincts, and traits. They're the first things on the character sheet for a reason." And like the other whiny Burning Wheel fans, you can only review the book as written, as it is, where it is, not the weird interpretations that a rather closed and apparently rather paranoid and angry community has made for themselves and not communicated or transmitted in the games themselves, right? So it might well be important to you, and for some reason Burning Wheel fans seem to be insufferable wankers for the most part, but that doesn't mean it's transmitted in the books. On the Candela Obscura review, Hugo Morph says, "You can accept dragons, elves and talking trees, but you can't accept a 2021 BMW 5 Series 530i with optional heated seating in your medieval fantasy world? Why are you so bigoted?" Yeah, I love this meme. It perfectly encapsulates the nonsense of saying, "but there are dragons," as an excuse for anything in a setting. Loki Takahashi says, "I have a lot of the same problems with Wizards of the Coast now. All of their products are so heavily pasteurized so that it can't offend anybody, that there's no evil left to fight. A severe lack of conflict other than it's in the monster manual or the stat block says evil." Yeah, that is a problem. This, like you say, pasteurization, homogenization, defanging and declawing of everything leaves you with little to play with. No wonder the stereotype is like role-playing baristas in Waterdeep or whatever, if that's the case, if everything's been screwed up in that way. But it's still a shame. Declawing cats is considered animal cruelty for a reason. Declawing games and fiction similarly goes against their nature. And lastly, on the Kalergi Plan video, we've had a little bit of a resurgence there for some reason. I guess that the fash is aflutter online a bit more lately because of goings on in Israel and Yemen and elsewhere. But yeah. Anonymous user says, "I like how this video keeps deleting my comments and preventing me from posting my opinion. Generally speaking, I do not delete comments. I delete spam, and if all you offer is insults and nothing worthwhile, no grist to my mill, those are the reasons why I might delete or not approve comments. Or if you're just spewing racism with no content. Otherwise, I don't do it. I have no control over what YouTube does about certain comments that you might be leaving on my videos, and also that Kalergi Plan video has, it must be well over 1,000 comments at this point after this many years and this many heated right-wing neo-Nazis venting their spleen there. And we all know that YouTube tends to fall over if it has that many comments on it. Comments disappear, comments reappear, comments disappear again. It's got nothing to do with me, Gov. Try being less racist and insulting, and maybe your comments will post and get past YouTube. John James says, what's happening in Europe is definitely not the Kalergi plan. Lol, lol. How many % English is London now? It's 53% white. Less than 50%. It's definitely not real. Replacement migration isn't real, lol. I mean, more illegal immigrants flooded into the US in 2023 than American babies born. Yeah, it's definitely not replacement migration. Okay, so you had a certain number of babies born, in addition to which you had a certain amount of immigration. The immigrants did not dropkick the babies into the ocean, so both were added. Therefore, there is no replacement. Now, it said 53% white in London, right? That's including non-English white people. But if you just want to go with English people, because there are non-white English people, then it's still over 50%. So, yeah, and this is in one of the most cosmopolitan, multicultural cities in the world, right? And, we're still in a majority either way you look at it, either through the lens of racism or the lens of nationalism. So what the hell are you on about? And why can't you do math? Talk to you soon. Zang.
Oh, Rose is a dying of the consumption. Rose's house, the finest and only cat house in the town of Jezebel, is up for grabs. It's every girl for herself, and only one can earn the deed to the house, and Rose's stash of gold all to herself. A rootin', tootin', moochin' adversarial story game for 2+ players. No GM, pack of cards needed, poker chips or beads needed, and you can get it at post-mart.com, lulu.com, or drive-through RPG.
Well, I look at it myself as the beginning, really, of an exploration. That's the reason we're exploring. You don't know what you'll run into on an exploration. What the sky looks like, what the stars look like. Do they still twinkle, or are they a steady light when you get outside the atmosphere?